Life is suffering. That sentence sounds harsh, uncomfortable, even offensive. We're taught to avoid it, soften it, or replace it with something more optimistic. We're told that life is about happiness, fulfillment, or success. And when suffering appears, as it always does, we assume something has gone wrong, that life has failed us, that we have failed ourselves. But what if suffering isn't the problem? What if pain, loss, and struggle are not signs that life is broken, but signs that life is asking something of us? Everywhere you look, people are trying to escape discomfort, through distraction, through pleasure, through endless self-improvement. Yet, despite having more comfort than any generation before us, anxiety and emptiness continue to rise. We feel lost, not because life is cruel, but because we don't know why we're enduring it. This is where Viktor Frankl enters the story. Frankl was not a philosopher who observed suffering from a safe distance. He did not write from comfort or theory. He wrote from experience, having survived Nazi concentration camps, where everything was taken from him, his freedom, his family, his future. And yet, in the midst of unimaginable suffering, Frankl noticed something unsettling. Some people collapsed, others endured. They faced the same hunger, the same brutality, the same uncertainty, and yet, something invisible separated those who broke from those who survived. It wasn't physical strength. It wasn't intelligence. It wasn't luck. It was meaning. Frankl realized that suffering alone does not destroy a person. What destroys a person is suffering without meaning. When life feels unbearable, it's not because the pain is too great, but because the reason for enduring it has disappeared. This video is not about removing suffering from your life. That promise is an illusion. Suffering is woven into existence itself. Loss is inevitable. Pain is unavoidable. But despair is not. In the next 30 minutes, we'll explore Viktor Frankl's psychology of meaning, why humans can endure almost anything if they know why, how purpose transforms pain, and why the most important freedom you have is not the ability to control your circumstances, but the ability to choose who you become within them. Because life is suffering, but that's not the problem. When Viktor Frankl arrived at the concentration camps, life was stripped down to its most brutal essentials. Names were replaced with numbers. Possessions vanished in seconds. Privacy, dignity, and identity dissolved almost overnight. Every day became a question of survival, not in the future, but in the next hour. And yet, amid the same freezing cold, the same starvation, the same constant presence of death, Frankl noticed something deeply disturbing. Not everyone responded the same way. Some prisoners deteriorated rapidly. They stopped caring. They stopped hoping. Their posture collapsed before their bodies did. Others, physically weaker, or more fragile, somehow endured longer. They maintained a quiet inner resistance, even when nothing external suggested hope. Frankl began to observe, not bodies, but minds. He saw that the moment a prisoner lost a reason to live, their chances of survival plummeted. When someone believed they had nothing waiting for them, no unfinished work, no loved one, no inner task, their will collapsed. The body followed soon after. But when a prisoner held onto meaning, sometimes something as fragile as a future conversation, a book yet to be written, or the image of a loved one, their suffering took on a different quality. The pain did not disappear, hunger did not lessen, but it no longer destroyed them from the inside. Frankl himself survived by holding onto purpose. He imagined reconstructing the manuscript of a book that had been taken from him. He envisioned teaching again. He carried ideas in his mind as others carried bread in their pockets. Meaning became psychological nourishment. What Frankl realized in the camps was revolutionary. Suffering does not automatically degrade a human being. What degrades us is meaningless suffering. Two men could experience the same agony, yet one would collapse into despair, while the other would endure with dignity. The difference was not circumstance, but interpretation. Not what happened to them, but what they believed their suffering demanded of them. This is the uncomfortable truth Frankl discovered in the darkest place imaginable. Life never stops asking questions. Even in horror, even in injustice, even in pain. And the question is never, why is this happening to me? The real question is, What does this moment require of me? Those who answered that question, however quietly, however imperfectly, retained their humanity. Those who could not were consumed long before death arrived. When suffering is stripped of meaning, it becomes unbearable. But when suffering is given meaning, it becomes survivable. For much of modern psychology, human motivation was explained through reduction. Freud believed we were driven by pleasure, by the pursuit of comfort, and the avoidance of pain. Adler argued that power and control were the true engines of human behavior. These ideas shaped how we came to understand ourselves. But Frankl saw something different. In the camps, pleasure was non-existent. Power was meaningless. And yet, some people still found reasons to live. Not because they felt good, not because they were strong, but because their lives still meant something. From this realization, Frankl proposed a radical idea. The primary drive of human beings is not pleasure, and not power, but meaning. He called it the will to meaning. When this will is fulfilled, suffering becomes bearable. But when it is frustrated, even comfortable lives collapse inward. Frankl called this condition the existential vacuum, a quiet, hollow feeling that spreads when life feels directionless. It often appears, not in moments of hardship, but in moments of ease. When survival is no longer the problem, the question becomes, why continue at all? This is why so many people feel empty despite having everything they were told to want. Success, freedom, and pleasure cannot replace meaning. They distract, but they do not sustain. Meaning, Frankl argued, is not something we invent to make ourselves feel better. It is something we discover through responsibility. Life does not ask us to be happy. It asks us to respond. Each moment presents a demand, a task, a challenge that belongs uniquely to us. And when we fail to answer that call, we don't feel pain, we feel emptiness. This is why boredom and anxiety are often symptoms of the same problem. Not too much suffering, but too little meaning. Frankl warned that when the will to meaning is ignored, people attempt to fill the void with substitutes: pleasure, consumption, distraction, ideology. But none of these satisfy for long. They numb, but they do not orient. Meaning does something different. Meaning gives suffering a direction. It turns endurance into purpose. It transforms chaos into a challenge that can be met. You do not ask life what it owes you, it asks you what you are willing to give. And when that question is answered, even imperfectly, despair loosens its grip. The first path to meaning, according to Viktor Frankl, is not found by looking inward, but by giving outward. It is discovered through creation, work, and contribution, through what you bring into the world, and what the world would be missing if you did not. This is not about passion. It is not about chasing fulfillment or self-expression. Frankl was clear. Meaning does not come from asking, "What do I want from life?" It comes from asking, "What does life require of me right now?" In the camps, Frankl observed that prisoners who felt responsible for something beyond themselves endured suffering differently. Some held onto unfinished work, a book, a theory, a task left incomplete. Others felt responsible for surviving for someone else, a spouse, a child, a memory that demanded continuity. Their pain did not disappear, but it became organized around purpose. Contribution anchors identity. When you are needed by a task, a responsibility, or a calling, your suffering no longer feels random. It becomes part of a larger demand. Even the smallest acts of responsibility can stabilize the psyche in moments of chaos. A decision to endure one more day, a commitment to preserve dignity, a refusal to let suffering be the final author of your story. Frankl emphasized that meaning is not reserved for grand achievements. It can be found in ordinary work, carried out with seriousness and care. A job done honestly, a task completed despite exhaustion, a responsibility fulfilled when it would be easier to withdraw. Creation, in this sense, is not about producing art or success. It is about answering life with action. This is why people often feel most lost when they feel unnecessary, when no one depends on them, when their actions seem replaceable or irrelevant. Meaning dissolves when responsibility disappears. But the moment you take responsibility, even for something small, you step back into alignment with life. You are no longer waiting to be saved. You are participating. Frankl believed that work done with meaning transforms suffering into sacrifice. Not sacrifice imposed from outside, but sacrifice chosen freely, and chosen sacrifice strengthens the human spirit. When life demands effort, and you answer with contribution, suffering stops being an enemy. It becomes a task. The second path to meaning is not found in what you do, but in what you experience. In love, in beauty, and in the quiet moments where life reveals something worth enduring. For Frankl discovered this path in the camps in an unexpected way. Stripped of everything, he found that love could exist even without physical presence. He would close his eyes and imagine his wife. He did not know whether she was alive or dead, but in those moments, her image sustained him. Love, he realized, does not depend on possession. It depends on recognition. To love someone is to see their essence, to understand that their existence gives meaning to your own. And this realization alone, even in absence, can sustain the human spirit. Frankl wrote that love is the ultimate and highest goal to which man can aspire. Not because it removes suffering, but because it gives suffering a direction. Love transforms endurance into devotion, pain into loyalty. Beauty works in a similar way. Even in the bleakest environments, Frankl noticed how a sunset, a memory, or a piece of music could momentarily lift the weight of existence. These moments did not change reality, but they reminded people that reality contained more than pain. Beauty interrupts despair. It reminds us that life is larger than our suffering, even when suffering dominates our field of vision. A single moment of beauty can reawaken the sense that life is still addressing us, that it still has something to say. This path to meaning does not require control. It requires openness, the willingness to receive, to notice, and to allow something beyond yourself to matter. Many people dismiss love and beauty as fragile comforts, but Frankl understood them as psychological lifelines. When nothing else remains, no work, no freedom, no certainty, love and beauty can still reach inward and preserve dignity. To experience meaning through love is to realize that your life is not isolated, that your suffering is not invisible, that something or someone matters enough to justify endurance, even in silence, even in absence, even in pain. The third path to meaning emerges only when the first two are taken away, when you can no longer change your circumstances, when you can no longer act, when love, work, and freedom are stripped down to their limits. This is where Viktor Frankl located the most difficult and most powerful source of meaning. When suffering is unavoidable, meaning is found in the attitude you choose toward it. Frankl observed that even in the camps, where choice seemed to disappear entirely, one freedom remained untouched. Prisoners could still decide how they would meet their suffering. They could surrender inwardly, or they could resist by preserving dignity, self-respect, and moral integrity. This freedom was invisible, but it was absolute. Two people could endure the same punishment. One would be humiliated by it. The other would be strengthened, not because the pain was less severe, but because they refused to let suffering define who they were. Frankl was clear: suffering in itself is meaningless. It becomes meaningful only when we give it meaning through our response. Pain does not ennoble automatically. It can degrade, embitter, and destroy. But when it is carried consciously, when it is born with purpose, it can transform a person from within. This is not about glorifying suffering. Frankl never argued that pain is good. He argued that when pain is unavoidable, it becomes a test, a challenge life presents, asking, "Who will you become now?" This is the moment where human beings reveal their deepest values. You may not be able to escape loss. You may not be able to prevent injustice. You may not be able to change what has happened, but you can choose whether suffering turns you bitter or whether it deepens your humanity. This choice is quiet. It happens internally, often unnoticed by others, but it determines whether suffering consumes you or whether it becomes a source of inner strength. Frankl called this the last of the human freedoms. To choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, when everything else is taken. This choice remains, and sometimes, that choice alone is enough to keep a person alive. From his experiences and insights, Viktor Frankl developed a therapeutic approach he called logotherapy, a psychology centered not on pleasure, power, or symptom reduction, but on meaning. Logotherapy begins with the simple assumption: life is not something to be interpreted endlessly, but something that asks questions. And mental suffering often emerges when a person feels unable to answer those questions. Frankl believed that meaning cannot be given by a therapist. It cannot be manufactured or imposed. Meaning must be discovered by the individual through responsibility. Therapy, in this sense, is not about self-expression, it is about self-transcendence. One of the core principles of logotherapy is that meaning is specific. There is no universal purpose that applies to everyone equally. Each moment carries its own demand. Each situation presents a unique task. What gives one person meaning may not give another anything at all. This is why Frankl rejected the idea that happiness should be the goal of life. Happiness, he argued, cannot be pursued directly. It emerges as a byproduct when a person fulfills a meaningful responsibility. Chasing happiness leads inward. Meaning points outward. In practice, logotherapy encourages individuals to shift focus away from obsessive self-analysis and toward what life is calling them to do. Frankl referred to this as dereflection, redirecting attention from internal distress to external purpose. Another method Frankl used was paradoxical intention, encouraging people to confront what they fear, rather than flee from it. When fear is met with intention, it often loses its grip. Anxiety feeds on avoidance. Meaning interrupts it. At its core, logotherapy restores agency. It reminds individuals that they are not merely victims of circumstance or emotion. Even in suffering, they remain responsible beings capable of choosing their response. This does not eliminate pain, but it changes the relationship to it. When a person understands what their suffering demands of them, whether it is endurance, patience, courage, or witness, despair begins to loosen. Life regains structure. Chaos gains direction. Logotherapy does not ask, "Why are you suffering?" It asks, "What is this suffering asking of you?" And in answering that question, meaning is not found in theory, but in action. There comes a point where all explanations fail, where effort no longer changes outcomes, where even hope feels exhausted. Frankl understood this edge of human experience intimately. He saw it in the camps when prisoners realized that liberation might never come, that survival itself was uncertain, and that nothing external could be relied upon. This is where many people believe meaning disappears, but Frankl discovered the opposite. When nothing is left, no future plans, no strength, no comfort, meaning does not vanish. It retreats inward. It becomes quieter, more severe, but it remains. In these moments, suffering becomes testimony. A person may no longer be able to act or love in visible ways, but they can still bear witness. They can still choose to endure with dignity, and in doing so, they affirm something essential about human existence. Frankl believed that even if a life is short, even if it ends in pain, it is not meaningless. Meaning is not measured by duration or outcome. It is measured by how a person responds when everything is taken. This idea challenges everything modern culture teaches us. We are told that a life without pleasure, success, or happiness is a failure. Frankl rejected this completely. He believed that the deepest meaning often appears where life becomes hardest. When suffering is unavoidable and unexplainable, the question shifts one final time. Not, "Why is this happening?" but, "How will I meet this?" In answering that question, a person affirms their humanity even in defeat, even in loss, even in death. This is the final freedom. Frankl defended the freedom to remain human under inhuman conditions. It is not dramatic. It is not visible. It is not rewarded, but it is real. And for Frankl, this freedom is enough to justify existence itself. When nothing is left, meaning remains waiting to be lived, not understood. Viktor Frankl never promised that life would be fair. He never claimed that suffering could be avoided. What he offered instead was something far more demanding and far more honest. He taught that life does not owe us happiness. It owes us a question, and that question is asked not once, but in every moment we are given. When suffering enters your life, the question is not, why me? It is, what does this moment require of me? Loss from a dead end into a responsibility. Suffering from chaos into a challenge that can be met with dignity. You may not be able to control what happens to you. You may not be able to prevent loss, failure, or injustice. But you are never released from the responsibility of choosing how you respond. Meaning is not something you wait for. It is something you answer with, in the attitude you take toward what cannot be changed. Frankl believed that those who have a why can endure almost any how. Not because meaning removes pain, but because it gives pain a direction. It tells you what your suffering is for. So the question now belongs to you, not tomorrow. Not when life becomes easier. Now, what suffering have you been resenting instead of answering? You do not need certainty. You do not need comfort. You do not need happiness. You need meaning. Because life is suffering. But that was never the problem. Meaning is. And when you find it, even suffering becomes survivable.